Hello and welcome to this QMS Royal Highland Show Industry Breakfast. I'm Mark Stephen. Over the last 16 months, we've seen an enormous amount of change, and understandably it's left lots of people with many questions. And I am delighted, therefore, to welcome to this industry breakfast Mairi Gougeon, the new Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and the Islands, who will hopefully answer a few of those questions. So hello for a start, Mairi, and first and foremost, congratulations on your appointment.
Oh, thanks very much, and thanks for that introduction. So yeah, I'm just absolutely delighted and really excited to have this role. I was previously Minister for Rural Affairs and just really loved being involved in that portfolio. So I was really excited to be placed in this role.
Well, there's a lot to be said for enthusiasm. You know, as we were saying earlier, the pandemic has changed a lot of things. It's changed a lot of behaviours. And during lockdown, consumers, well, both periods of lockdown, had to shop locally a lot of the time. And I think many people saw the benefits of shopping locally. You know, they shop locally more than ever before. So what can the Scottish Government do to keep that momentum of local shopping going?
You're absolutely right. And it was brilliant to see, I think, that change in behaviour. Well, I think it's more about our local butchers, bakers and shops really stepped up to the mark in terms of catering for people, and especially living in a community like I do, where, you know, some people you have to travel to get to a bigger supermarket, say. And I think it was great to see people really shopping local and supporting their local businesses. And I think that's one thing that did start to worry me slightly, you know, as restrictions eased and people start to feel like we're getting a bit more back to normal, that behaviours would go back to normal. And I actually saw that in my own community recently with my local butcher, in fact, who I think that had done so well and been really well supported during lockdown, but then people started to go back to their old behaviours. And the trade started to lessen. So I think that it's really important that, especially in government, we do all we can to try and encourage people to continue shopping local and supporting local, and reminding people that it's, you know, it's these businesses that were there for us and there for our communities through the pandemic, and we need to support them as much as we possibly can. Now, both myself and my predecessor, Fergus Ewan, worked closely with a lot of the trade bodies across the whole food and drink sector and worked on the development of the COVID-19 recovery plan. And that was announced towards the end of last year. And to support that, we'd committed £5 million over this financial year. And we're using that funding to really take forward a number of different things to help stimulate demand for local food in Scotland. So we've launched a marketing campaign called Scotland Brings So Much to the Table. So that ran across media and other outlets to really drive an increase in sales and really just a general awareness of Scottish food and drink too. We've been trying to raise the profile of producer and local farmers markets right across Scotland and really promoting access to fresh local produce through butchers, fishmongers, bakers, farm shops, and really focusing on the delivery of the Scottish Food and Drink Fortnight campaign to really showcase and highlight the strength of the local food and drink offering that we have in Scotland. So there's been a whole host of measures we've looked at before, but we've also committed to various things in our manifesto to really drive that forward as well, and really support the development of local supply chains, because that's really important now too. And that's where I'm really looking forward to being in the role that I'm in just now and meeting with all parts of the food and drink industry over the next few weeks and months, which will of course be including Scottish butchers.
It's an interesting time though, this, isn't it? Because I mean, because everything is so up in the air, because it is so different, there's a real chance to make a difference, to sort of, you know, to change the game plan.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And again, you know, throughout this past period of change and challenge that we've been in, I think it highlights to people just how important, you know, our local businesses are, all our small businesses. And like I say, especially communities where I live in Brechin and Angus, which is made up of small towns where your butcher, your baker, your fishmonger and all that too. And I think it's just vital that we support local businesses as much as we possibly can and keep that local supply going.
During the election, your party, the Scottish National Party, made a manifesto commitment to farmer-led group approach when it came to formulating policy, and that has seen sectors within Scottish agriculture come together to design and make recommendations on how the industry can decarbonise and build a more sustainable future. Now, I'm curious, what's your personal vision for this? And secondly, when will farmers be able to access funding to make this, for the sake of an argument, dream a reality?
That work was absolutely vital because I think we have got a whole host of challenges in front of us. You know, we've had and that we've been through as well. We've been through the pandemic, we've left the EU, and we also have our really ambitious climate change targets too. So there are a lot of challenges there. But the work of the farmer-led groups was absolutely vital because I think we have to work with the industry because they know best, they work in this, and they can really help shape where we go from here. So that's where their work has been really important. And in our manifesto commitment, we committed to establishing an implementation board within the first 100 days of the Parliament so that we could really drive forward the recommendations that have come out of the farmer-led groups. And I would say that my vision for farming and Crofton in Scotland is a really positive one because our farmers and our producers contribute such a massive value to us in Scotland. They produce our high quality food, they're custodians of the countryside, and there's another really important community element to that because that also forms the backbone and is the backbone of our rural communities. And we're committed to working with industry and other partners to really enable the agricultural sector as a whole to contribute to our world leading emissions targets and support biodiversity and make sure that we go through that just transition. I met with the farmer-led group chairs recently to discuss the reports and again the creation of the implementation board too. And of course, I mean, what came out of that was just the passion and the optimism. And again, what really came across is the fact that, you know, we can really be world leaders in this and set a really high standard in Scotland and lead other countries in the world with the approach that's been set out and that we really want to implement. So as much as there are massive challenges here, I think there are also massive opportunities.
Counterbalancing it to a certain extent, you must be aware of the fact that in certain segments of the media, social and mainstream, red meat's been getting a bit of a kicking of late. You know, in any discussion about climate change, the industry is frequently portrayed as being one of the bad guys. Now, what should the industry be doing to counter that narrative? I mean, how can they showcase their environmental or climate credentials?
I think, well, I probably just want to start off by, first of all, assuring everyone in the red meat sector, I think whether you're a producer right through to the consumer, that eating our Scotch beef, Scotch lamb, specially selected pork, that I'm personally fully committed to ensuring our agriculture sector is portrayed in a positive light. And that's something that I've always been passionate about and continue to be passionate about in the role that I'm in at the moment. I mean, you know, we reflected on this in the previous question about the changes and the other things that we'll have to do to meet our ambitious climate change targets. But again, that's where the work of the farmer-led groups is really important in identifying ways that we can do that. And I think that in the long term, that is going to be of benefit to the industry as a whole, because I think the more that we can shout about our environmental credentials, the better, whether that's at home or whether that comes to exporting and looking at further afield. And again, I think this comes down to being an area of opportunity, because I think it gives the industry an edge when it comes to the procurement of red meat from a number of areas like councils and schools as well. So I think that there are definite opportunities there, and I think that we can all possibly just talk more positively about it. We produce meat to some of the best standards anywhere else in the world, and that's something to be proud of.
Can I ask you what might be a difficult question for you to answer? You've obviously bought into the red meat narrative. You can see the sense of it. How about the rest of the cabinet?
Oh yeah, well, I'm the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and Islands, and that's my job here to, on behalf of the government. But yeah, I would say that we're all aligned. That would be the government position. That's my position, and yeah, it would be the position of the Scottish Government. Okay,
thank you for that. Brexit at the end of 2020 was very difficult. Parts of the Scottish red meat industry were hit very hard. I mean, exports in certain sectors were down by 80% to Europe, 80%. Now there are serious concerns about this Australia Free Trade Agreement, which is being proposed. The problem's an old one here. We want to be free to export around the world, but at the same time, we want to protect our farmers and our, supply chains. Balancing that up, is that achievable? Is that a realistic aim? Is it doable?
I think it is achievable. I mean, one thing that's really important to me is our local supply chains and making sure that we have strong local supply chains in Scotland, because I think over the course of the past year, we've seen how important our food security is. And that's where, some of the programmes, and again, what we've committed to in our manifesto is about really developing that work. We have the Food for Life programme in Scotland that's been there for about the past 10 years, working with local authorities to try and encourage them to source locally. And that's been hugely successful so far. And we really want to try and build on that and build that domestic supply and expand that into other areas of the public sector, whether that's NHS, whether that's prisons, because we've shown the benefits of that. It benefits our health and it benefits the local economy as well. So I think that element of it is really important. But you're also right in terms of exports. So, we've left the EU, that we've seen a whole host of issues that's caused. And I think it is also important that we look to open up to new markets for our exports. And I think that you just have to look at the issues that the loss of the Chinese licenses caused for the pig industry to get a really full perspective on what the impacts of lost export markets can mean. So I'll certainly be working, and other colleagues in government too, to open up new opportunities for our exports where possible. And we're really trying to focus that through our Scotland Food and Drink Export Plan and our specialists that we'll have situated in key markets throughout the world. And we'll try to continue to identify opportunities that are going to be good for Scottish red meat exports. And again, we talk about the balance there. And again, that's not easy. And you talked about the Australian trade deal there. And that is an area of huge concern for us and one of huge frustration at the moment. Well, there's just been a letter that's gone out from 14 industry bodies in Scotland today to Liz Truss. And I wrote to Liz Truss as soon as I was in post about the very real threat of that deal and what that would mean for industry in Scotland. It would just completely undercut our farming businesses here and right across the UK, all to increase our GDP by, I think the last estimate was 0.02%. And especially when we produce our red meat to such high standards, I think that we cannot then see floods of imports from the likes of Australia, where it's produced to a lesser standard, flooding our market here. And I just don't think that's acceptable. So that's why I'd written to Liz Truss to ask for an urgent meeting on that. I'm still waiting, but it is really frustrating because this is something that the UK government hasn't engaged with us on. Been waiting 3 weeks for that urgent call and it still hasn't come. So we're doing everything within our power that we possibly can to try and influence this and make sure that we're doing our best on behalf of the farmers and industry in Scotland.
It's very difficult to see how any government anywhere in the world could be expected to be taken seriously in terms of being concerned about climate change if they are prepared to import meat from literally halfway around the world, from 13,000 miles away.
It's a really important factor, and again, one that we've raised with the UK government, because we can produce our meat to the best standards anywhere else in the world and really focus on our climate change targets here. But if we are importing it from halfway across the world, it completely undermines the message of what we're telling farmers that they have to work to here. That's where we have, in Scotland in particular, we have specific points around trade that we look to achieve. And part of that is we need to, and what we make sure as a government is that our ambitions with climate change and our targets for net zero tie into every possible area that we look at. And we made that one of the fundamental principles that we look at when we're considering trade deals with other countries.
That's really good to hear, actually, because in the past, I always thought it was a very binary approach. It was, you were either guardians of the countryside or food security. But in your opinion, is it possible to do both?
Oh, I believe it's definitely possible to do both, yes.
Mairi Gougeon, Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs in the Islands, thank you very much for your time. It's been very interesting speaking to you. Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much. And it's just been a pleasure to talk with you today, though I am missing the bacon roll this time round. That's the one thing I remember from QMS breakfast.
Yeah, me too, it's the brown sauce I miss most of all. Anyway, and thank you obviously for joining us for this QMS Royal Highland Show Industry Breakfast. We do have another one tomorrow morning, so if you can, join us then. Thank you.